China wants to eliminate the US dollar. And the first concern is, why would anybody want to eliminate another currency, and eliminate it from what? We're talking about the hegemony of the US dollar as the leading reserve currency in the world. As the leading reserve currency in the world, it has an enormous privilege. That privilege is that you can print your own currency and you can export your inflation to other countries. Other countries buy your currency and you don't have to pay anything for it. In buying your currency, it means that you can purchase goods, oil, aluminium, gold, jeans, for pieces of paper that you can produce at free will. That is the privilege of being the hegemonic, to have the hegemony of your currency in the world. Now that position is occupied by the United States. And China wants to become #1 country in the world. They have already achieved that on many accounts, in manufacturing, in technology. But when it comes to finances, although the 4 largest banks in the world are Chinese, there is one hurdle that they haven't been able to pass, and that is the question of the currency. Still today, the US remains above 50% of the reserve currency of the world, while the Chinese currency is in around 2%. That's a big difference. Even the euro is bigger, even the British pound is bigger. So in order to consolidate their status as the leading nation in the world, to achieve full hegemony, political hegemony, they need to overcome this issue. So that explains why. And then how? How do you eliminate the power of the US dollar? Well, to do that, China has to follow a number of strategies. One is to consolidate a group of nations that they will trade with each other without using the US dollar. That was the original idea of the so-called BRIC, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. But unfortunately, it didn't last long, partly because Brazil fell from the club, and then India also started to make trouble of their own. But still, the position with Russia is very solid. All the oil with Russia is done with the Chinese currency in a bilateral agreement. So they use both currencies, actually. And then other countries that have joined in by being pushed through the American mismanagement of diplomacy, especially during the Trump era. This is Iran. Out of sanctions, they have moved into the orbit of China, Turkey, who after the failed coup d'etat has fallen into the hands of China, and most recently Saudi Arabia, also for the same reason, a failed coup by the American intelligentsia in order to overcome the present leadership. I failed, and now they have ready for the first time to dump the dollar. That's the basis of the petrodollar, was founded with the Saudi oil, and move into the hands of the Chinese yuan. This is quite a big turning point. Other countries in the region of Central Asia, they have naturally moved into bilateral agreements with China, that they all abandoned the US dollar. And a large number of new contracts is being signed with Eastern European countries, South Asian countries. So the list is growing. And then in South America, they have another list, starting from Venezuela, of course, with the sanctions. But other countries, they are also showing interest in China. In Africa, it's almost a complete monopoly. China is gaining more and more respect because they are building bridges, hospitals, roads. So bit by bit, the policy of diplomacy is giving China more weight. And then the second strategy is the introduction of gold. Now, their idea is gold will replace the US dollar in international trading. So although they see that the yuan will be difficult, but they understand that the gold will be more convincing as international means of payment, because it requires no trust in the country of origin. It's simply neutral. Gold has no nationality. So they started in order to lure oil contracts to be traded in yuan, they made the yuan convertible into gold, and that was the first. Now the logic, the instrument is already there. Is this yuan convertible into gold? All you have to do is to extend it to other trades. But the instrument is already there. And the Chinese have been carefully monitoring how it operates and so on. And so they have already quite a fair understanding of the acceptance and the possibilities that the present system has. The great potential is, and everybody's talking about this, is the introduction of a single currency in the BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative. That it makes a lot of sense, because what you have is 100 nations trading with each other in 100 different currencies. Now, the very logic of the caravan is that you move from one country to another and you keep trading. Now, if you have to do that with 100 currencies and you have to do 100 times forexes, then you end up with nothing. Just the money goes into exchange. How about one single currency? That makes a lot of sense. Well, what will be the more logical candidate? Of course, China would like to put the yuan there, but that will be difficult, because you cannot tell the people abandon the dollar in order to take my currency. But it is more logical for them to replace the US dollar with gold at the international stage. And now gold appears to them as an instrument in order to eliminate the power of the US dollar. So these are the two strategies that China is following. One is consolidating a group of nations that they have become in the orbit of China. The second one is the introduction of gold as a replacement for the US
dollar. Amazing. So, okay, I've got a follow-up question, because most people are, they're plugged in, or they've bought into the American narrative that America is a policeman of the world, it's the land of the free and home of the brave, etc., etc. And America is interested in, in meting out justice and all these kind of things. And America's done a very good job of making China look like this evil communist. They surveil everybody, they treat everybody, they put everybody into camps, and they're very strict and they're very brutal in the way that they do things. So everybody's really afraid of China becoming the number one so-called policeman of the world, or the leader of the world. So what would be your response to that, especially on the subject of China being a communist country or a communist leadership?
Well, it's just, as you said, American propaganda. So the whole information is presented always in that way. Propaganda is always presented a one-side story. There's no corroboration of the stories. It's just headlines. Like most recently, the fact that the 5G technology would kill people, and you can see how this misinformation appears. It doesn't need to be backed up by anything. It's just simple individuals who present themselves as experts. They just come and they say something. And by the time you realize, the 5G technology is a killer technology. Now, the interesting part of this is, if that is the case, then you will have to justify that China has decided to massively annihilate, assassinate its own population, because they are planting about 20,000 new antennas every month, which is approximately the total amount of antennas that there is in the West right now. China is doing this thing every month. So unless you are capable of supporting that principle, whereby the Chinese government wants to assassinate its own people, the whole thing is absurd and just pure propaganda. Well, that's one example of how they do things. They are a communist country. They are a communist country. They are not denying it, but they have eliminated 800 million people out of poverty in the last 30 years. And still, United States have big bags of recorded official poverty in the region of 40 million, according to their census. If you add all the illegal immigrants, which is approximately another 20, we're talking about 60 million people living in conditions that are below living standards. And we are talking about the leading nation in the world. No, that never appears on the news. Somebody else is the bad, but not them. So China is not perfect, and nobody's suggesting that. But certainly, if those people who feel lured by these accusations, then they should think where are they coming from, and perhaps the most important part will be, and how, if this is the case, how does that affect my life as a whole? There are many ways of looking at China, and there's a story that it comes from the Middle East, whereby 3 people went to China, and the 3 came back, and the first one said, "Is full of scholars, and it's got so many libraries and books and wonderful people to speak to." And then the second one came and he said, "It has the most beautiful woman in the world." And the third one came in and he said, "It's full of thieves. I went there and I was robbed every time I went." So 3 people went to the same place and they came back with a different story. And that's what I mean by, what does it mean to you? If you are just contemplating this matter, sitting down in a coffee shop, and you say, "I don't like this," or "I don't like that," well, that's a degree of discourse, but it's nothing but an exercise of pure opinion. But if, on the other hand, you are on the move of trying to eliminate the 300 years of liberalism that have brought ruin to the world, and a banking system that enslaves mankind, and you're in the business of eliminating capitalism, if that is your state, then you will welcome China with your arms. If, on the other hand, this doesn't matter to you at all, any appeal to justice is questionable, not on account of China, but on account of you. Either where are you standing? And then I will understand whether you have anything to say about China or not. If the only argument would be that for those people, I'm talking about the people who now say capitalism has to be eradicated, and for those people who have become aware that the banking system is not neutral, and if they are talking about justice, the biggest injustice in the world is fractional reserve banking. This is a fraud of monumental proportions. If that is where you stand for, then China and everything China represents have to be highlighted. And just by the principle of the enemy of my enemy, he's my friend. So it's just by that, you should be able to pay attention to China. But then when you see the kind of things that they are doing, and you actually put your nose into it, and you try to understand what is actually happening there, how is this success possible? Because you still have to explain how a nation that had no technology whatsoever has come to be on top. The real question is, how are they doing the things better than us? And what are the things that we can learn? That is the interesting position. But all the other views that they have been presented as China is, the Asian invasion, is the Mongols coming back, is all that type of cheap talking. It's just what it is. It tells you more about the person who says it than what China is. So in other words, you need a 4th layer of awareness in order to be able to solve those problems. It's always complex. And how do the Chinese define communism? And they define it with 4 ideograms that it says, the first two says, is gone, which is common. The other one is shen, which is good, the common good. And then the second two mean the doctrine, is the doctrine of the common good. In Chinese, communism means the doctrine of the common good. Now that changes quite a lot, because the fundamental part is this thing called the commons. And what does it mean, the commons? How do you build from there? As a foundational idea, common property, what does it mean? It's not the state property, it's not private property, it's commons. Okay, everything Britain was built on before liberalism arrived. So there is a lot of things to discover about China, and the prejudices that we have are only but prejudices. We are looking at them from our own perspective. For example, the idea that if they are coming here to conquer, that's what we've done to the rest of the world. Mm-hmm. No wonder we don't want anybody else to be in charge, because if they do to us what we've done to them, then that's a horrible story. You know, it's like, imagine Pakistan invading England for a second. I will be worried, because if the treatment was reciprocal, then England will be destroyed of every industry they have, is spoiled for 200 years. And the result will be people totally mentally dependent on somebody else's culture. They will make them feel guilty of saying the word England. And the only thing they will think of is curry and cricket, and polo, Afghani polo. That is the kind of thing they are worried about. China is only projecting their own, what they've done to the world. So China is to be discovered, but the key of the matter is, if I were to engage myself into the discovery of China, what I will find important is not to try to understand it from my perspective, not to try to impose my values on them. Either are they democratic or not? Are they dictatorial or not? They are completely different and infinitely better. The system that they have is proven better than the one we have. But I will try to understand within Chinese culture. So in other words, how is it that they think about their economic model? How is that they articulate the logic around these guild organizations that they have created there? How is that they understand the commons, how they understand popular democracy, how they understand the economy of the people, how they understand all these things from within their own logic? Then you will come to understand. It's like trying to understand Confucius from the point of view of the Catholic Church. You will not understand anything. But if you try to understand Confucius within Confucius, then you will get to understand who he is. So that is how I would recommend anybody who is interested in China to penetrate China in abandoning their own value conceptions and trying to absorb the values of the people they want to understand.